After months of anticipation, the Iowa caucuses are here, kicking off primary election season across the country. Republican presidential candidates have been hitting the state for months now, hoping to win over Iowans. While each of the 5 candidates are hoping to come out on top, right now, former President Donald Trump is the front runner. At stake in the caucuses are Iowa's 40 delegates to the Republican National Convention this summer, where the candidate for the 2024 presidential election will formally be announced for Republicans. I'm Stephanie Haney, and in this In the News Now special, we're breaking down how the Iowa caucuses work and what the results could mean for the other primaries to come, along with how other states are preparing for those elections. Let's start now with a quick Iowa caucuses explainer. Here's WQAD's John Diaz.
Iowa is always the first state to cast ballots for presidential nominations, but it does things a little differently. For one thing, there are no voting booths. Instead, voters show up to caucus sites throughout the state's nearly 1,700 precincts, and they must get there by 7 p.m. or they can't participate. These caucus sites include churches, school gymnasiums, and libraries, and even stores in the community. For Iowa Republicans, they will meet in person, and representatives for each candidate will speak, hoping to drum up support. Every caucus goer will be given a slip of paper to pick their favorite candidate. The ballots are counted and the results announced later that night. The big change this year is for Democratic caucuses. For the first time, Democratic voters will cast their presidential preference by mail. The results will then be announced on March 5th, Super Tuesday. The party will still hold an in-person caucus on January 15th, but only for party business unrelated to picking a presidential nominee.
So why do the Iowa caucuses matter so much, and why is this first primary a global event to watch? Tom Beaumont, a national political reporter with the Associated Press, explains the significance behind the caucuses and what's at stake for the Republican presidential candidates.
I'm Tom Beaumont, a national political correspondent for the Associated Press based in Des Moines, Iowa. And today we're going to be talking about the Iowa caucuses. The Iowa caucuses are the leadoff nominating contest in the race for the presidency, and they've been there in that role for the past 50 years. This year the competition is all on the Republican side. There's a Democratic president who we expect to be renominated. This is not a state-run election. It's a party function. And that's one of the reasons that they get to go first, because they have long been in agreement with New Hampshire, which holds the first state-run primary election. Like I said, the caucuses are a series of community meetings. There's actually more than 1,600 of them, one for every precinct in the state. And for that time, people sit together. Some people stand up and speak on behalf of the candidates, and when that process is finished, people vote. They vote in front of their neighbors. In the case of the Republicans, they vote on a secret ballot, on a piece of paper. This year, the Republicans are looking at turnout of more than 187,000, and that may seem small nationally, but it's larger than any caucus in the past. So it's going to require more than tens of thousands to reach the margins that these campaigns see for themselves in either winning or challenging Trump. But Trump's campaign is vastly different than it was. It's vastly more disciplined. He remains the dominant frontrunner.
It's time for the Republican Party to unite.
With less than a month to go, the race here is essentially for second place. If that second place finisher comes within, a reasonable margin of the former president who is expected to win, that person may claim some momentum going into New Hampshire.
You have Donald Trump, who's obviously moved left.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has put all his chips in Iowa. He has said he is going to win Iowa. He has been to all 99 counties in Iowa. When we talk about things that make these caucuses different, one of them is that the Republican governor, Kim Reynolds, has broken with tradition and endorsed DeSantis.
Is you don't defeat Democrat chaos with Republican chaos. And that's what Donald Trump gives us.
But former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley has some traction. She's gotten good reviews from her debates, for standing her ground, and she is in the race for second place in Iowa. Should Haley beat DeSantis in Iowa, that would almost certainly signal the end of the DeSantis campaign and provide a lift to Haley, who is stronger than any other candidate in New Hampshire. So today, it's become this global event where the world watches what happens in this relatively small, low population agricultural state on the prairie, but where the first votes and the first impressions of the presidential field are registered.
Now, one factor that could impact turnout for the Iowa caucuses is the weather. Winter weather could dampen the turnout this year. As one professor at Iowa State University says, turnout is already low when the weather is nice before you start adding snow into the mix.
Well, to start with, the turnouts are relatively small. 15% of the registered voters for a particular party would really be pretty good turnout. And that's about as high as it gets, maybe a low 20% range. The Democrats are going to have maybe single-digit percentage turnout this time because there's really nothing much at stake. Republicans, I think, will be pretty energized, so 20%, give or take, I think, will probably show up. And it's difficult for exactly that reason under best of circumstances, let alone the occasional blizzard or a nor'easter that hits us here. We also get Alberta clippers, by the way. There's nothing to prevent that from coming down as an import from north of the border. And it's a big problem. It's a problem particularly for folks who live in outlying rural areas. You know, if you're in a town like Ames, which isn't exactly a big city, you might have to drive or trudge through some snow for a couple of blocks to get to your precinct location. Rural areas might have to go 10 miles or more to a neighboring town, and some people don't live in a town to begin with, so they're really isolated. So for them, it's a lot more difficult. A blizzard there pretty much means you're marooned for a couple of days.
Now, ahead of the caucuses, there were several events held in Iowa where candidates hoped to gain more ground with voters. Trump held a town hall with Fox News. Vivek Ramaswamy recorded a live podcast episode, and CNN hosted the Republican primary debate. Now, just two candidates participated, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, and they both took to the stage attacking each other and Trump. For more on that high-stakes debate, here's Associated Press national political writer Steve Peoples.
Both Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley know that they're running out of time to change the trajectory of this race, and as a result, they really savaged each other. You know, we heard Nikki Haley call Ron DeSantis a liar more times than I can remember. She created a new website directing voters and viewers to that website that focused on his dishonesty, as she describes it. And DeSantis fought back, said that Haley is just basically focused on doing the bidding of her donors as opposed to serving the people. So they went after each other viciously, but they also went after Donald Trump in a way that we haven't quite seen before. Donald Trump, of course, was not on stage. He was invited, as the moderator Jake Tapper pointed out, but he declined to attend, as he has 6 times before. So both candidates had an opportunity to go after him. For the most part, so far in recent debates, they passed or didn't go super aggressively. That changed a bit tonight, where we heard Nikki Haley say bluntly that Donald Trump lost the election in 2020, which of course is true and might be obvious, but in Republican primary politics, that is not something you hear very often. Ron DeSantis, went after Trump and actually said that he thought Trump would be convicted in one of his criminal trials, and asked openly, what will the Republican Party do? So, aggressive attacks against each other and the president, again, reflecting this idea that these candidates are running out of time to change this race. All along, it's looked like these two candidates are locked in a tight race for second place, and they were looking tonight for momentum to score a strong second. Nikki Haley clearly has the most to gain right now. She seems to have some momentum, but it's one thing to have momentum on paper. It's another thing running up against Donald Trump, who is essentially an incumbent in this race. So, both candidates have tremendous challenges ahead.
The Iowa caucuses are just the beginning of this big year in politics, with more primaries and elections to come, of course. And let's not forget about all of the legal challenges facing the former president. Now, for a closer look at what to expect in politics in the months ahead, here's John Croman.
As 2024 arrives, the nation's political future is up in the air.
A lot of things that we just can't easily put into a calculation.
The first big test for Republican presidential wannabes will be the Iowa caucuses, where Donald Trump leads by more than 20 points, and challengers are battling for second place.
They might say, I came in second, I did better than I thought, defied expectations, I'm still in it.
President Biden's job performance numbers don't bode well for him, but former President Trump is embroiled in a host of civil and criminal cases.
We've got the variables of criminal trials, we've got the variables of potentially 2 Supreme Court decisions that could affect the presidential election.
It's also a race that will produce a lot of very reluctant voters.
Minnesota's Dean Phillips faces his first test in New Hampshire, where he'll try to outdo a write-in campaign from Biden supporters.
Dean Phillips is basically running on Joe Biden's personal qualities. He's too old to be president.
At the state capitol, it'll be a battle for control of the Minnesota House, with Republicans bound and determined to undo the DFL trifecta ushered into power back in 2022.
Because if Republicans take over the state house, all the bargaining about public policy will change in a very radical way.
5th District Congresswoman Ilhan Omar will face yet another Democratic primary challenge, a rematch with Don Samuels and new DFL candidates Sarah Gadd and Tim Peterson.
Don Samuels does not have a one-on-one race with Ilhan Omar, and that may complicate his ability to upset her in the primary.
And Senator Amy Klobuchar will run for a 4th term. So far, no major Republican candidates have stepped up to challenge her.
As you just heard mentioned there, the Supreme Court is expected to weigh in on cases that could impact the presidential election. The court will decide if Trump can be kept off the ballot in states like Colorado and Maine. This is due to his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Rachel Krause spoke with a law professor at CU Boulder to learn more about what's ahead.
The U.S. Supreme Court says it will review Colorado's ruling that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist, barred from office, just like Confederate officers after the Civil War. Trump's lawyers argue that rule doesn't apply to the president, and that January 6th was not an insurrection. Now, the nation's top court will have the final say.
So nobody's going to be introducing new facts or arguing specifics. It'll be a very general conversation. Each side will have a half an hour each to make their case at oral argument. But that's really just a public show because most of the activity will happen in the written briefs. All of the things, the 50 pages that each side submits that articulates their view of the arguments.
Doug Spencer, a professor of election law at CU Boulder, says it's the written arguments that carry far more weight here and are mainly how justices make their decision. And in this case, time is limited. Normally, attorneys would have 3 to 4 months to write their briefs. Here, they'll have 2 weeks.
In this case, the courts have not signaled any specific issue that they're going to hear. So as of right now, unless they give us more guidance, every possible issue that was litigated below is on the table. And so the 50-page limit becomes a really big issue because now the parties need to make editorial choices and legal choices about which issues they want to bring, they think are the strongest, and which issues might have to be left out.
Oral arguments are set to begin February 8th. Spencer says justices may ask clarifying questions or stay silent if they've already made up their mind. But what we can expect to hear from attorneys, Spencer says, is a focus on history, from what writers meant when the 14th Amendment was written and the mood of the country and Congress when it was ratified in 1868.
But this particular Supreme Court has signaled strongly that they care a lot about the original public meaning of constitutional amendments and these original views and the history along a long line of cases, voting, gun rights, abortion, all kinds of different issues. So I expect both sides to make arguments deeply rooted in America's histories and tradition to make their case.
The Supreme Court will hear arguments in early February, which means they could issue a ruling ahead of the March primaries. Now, pending that decision, as of right now, Trump's name will appear on the ballot as the decision to keep it off is on hold for the time being. Meanwhile, other states are already gearing up for their own primaries. Sarah Horbakowitz spoke with voters and election officials in Arkansas to hear what they expect for the upcoming March primaries.
It's kind of exciting just to have that sticker.
Anna Skinner has watched her mom go through the election process for years as a state Senate candidate, but this year will be the first time she gets to step in a booth herself.
I get to have a voice and say what I think on a national scale.
This year, millions will head to the polls, tens of thousands in Pulaski County alone, to make their voice heard. For County Election Coordinator Amanda Dickens, Super Tuesday begins her Super Bowl season.
We've been prepping for the last 3 to 4 months, just getting ready.
From poll worker trainings to outreach events, she wants voters to know their ballot is secure.
All of the machines are locked and secured after testing and remain locked and secured until they're delivered to the polling locations. State Board came out and did an audit of our 2022 general election, 100% accuracy.
And as voters and counties are preparing, so are candidates, like presidential candidate and former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson.
People are saying it's upon us, we've got to make a decision.
Recent polls show Hutchinson at less than 1%, but as he campaigns in Iowa ahead of the caucuses, he's hoping to build national momentum.
And from my standpoint in Iowa, you have to beat expectations. You don't have to win. You have to come in a strong finish that beats the expectations.
Planning to stay in the race and visit Arkansas again closer to our March primaries.
If you're not in the race, then you can't make a difference and you can't have a chance of influencing the direction of our country. You got to be prepared for the long trip of this campaign.
While many states hold their primary elections on March 5th, known as Super Tuesday, the Iowa caucuses give us early insight into how those elections may go. The Iowa caucuses are on Monday, January 15th, beginning at 7 p.m. Central Time. We'll be keeping an eye on the caucuses and the rest of the primaries during this political season, and we will bring you the most important updates as we learn more as this process unfolds. Thanks for watching this edition of In the News Now. I'm Stephanie Haney.